Do you lose yourself in relationship, or does the relationship make you lose yourself? If you disconnect from your identity and you're in a state of confusion, unable to voice your needs and wants or share vulnerability with your partner or a family member or loved one, chances are that you might be holding back and hiding because you don't feel that it's safe to be yourself. And what results is feeling stuck, feeling diminished. You might even feel like a shell of yourself. If this is happening, it's possible that you have lost yourself in relationship. This video is going to break down and explore the what, the why, and the how of losing ourselves. I am Alan Robarge. I'm an attachment-focused psychotherapist and a relationship educator. I have 23 years experience working with people who crumble inside when relationships end, or even before the end, they start to suffocate. And I help those hurt by love rebuild what heartbreak shattered and ultimately learn how to forge a stronger sense of self. My work is about emotional neglect, attachment, trauma, and relationship grief. I offer individual support and couples counseling. This particular video about losing ourselves, losing yourself, is part of a series, and it is actually the first video in the series. So stay tuned for more videos to follow. This is a subject that's dear to my heart. This is my own personal healing process, and it's not something that we can cover in one video. So I'm creating a series. If you like this series and even this particular video, you want to get my notes. I have about 20 pages of notes here, which I know sounds like a lot, but that's what we're going to cover today. And if you want to get a copy of a PDF, you're welcome to do that. Now, also, this series and this type of video is an introduction, a precursor to the videos, the process-oriented videos, which are about doing healing work and really integrating this information. Those types of videos are part of the new, almost new, relatively new subscription membership here on YouTube. So make sure that you please look in the description of this video to learn more about if you want to join us. I am looking for those people who really resonate with this content. I receive messages frequently of a number of people who followed me for years. Thank you very much. You keep saying like, oh, it's so great that you're back on YouTube. So to all of those people, thank you so much. And we can continue to connect in different ways and go deeper into this content in the subscription membership. So please check that out. Let's jump into the what of losing ourselves. And maybe take a breath. Maybe just before we jump in, it's like check in with your body. I'm hoping this is more than information. It's not just informational, that there is potential for transformation, which I know is a tall order to fill. But I'm hoping that this information is actually something that can help you along in your process. It's not just fancy ideas. When we lose ourselves in a relationship, what is happening? Uh, It is gradual. It is an internal process, and you are prioritizing proximity. And we're going to go through some of these words, the proximity of the relationship over your own sense of self. Now, proximity here, we're talking about creating a hierarchy of importance where the relationship and the other person and staying connected to them is more important than your own needs, and that takes precedence. So you already are secondary in this process. This isn't because the other person asked you to be secondary. It's that this is the way that you show up in relationship, that you need to test the environment. You need to test and find out what's happening, and you will adjust and change who you are in order to make sure that that bond, that attachment bond, is preserved. This requires a certain amount of policing yourself, the situation, and the other person. Over time, what's happening is you're moving away from focusing on yourself, and instead you're focusing on the other person. This is a way of being in a relationship where the main priority is what's going on for the other person and not what's going on for you. And if you do this enough, if you've been trained in your history to do this enough, you start forgetting your own inner world. You start forgetting your needs. You start forgetting how to have a voice. You start forgetting how to practice vulnerability. And instead, a obstacle as a barrier to connecting exists because you are now dependent on observing whether or not your behaviors, whether or not your words, whether or not your thoughts are going to maximize that particular connection. I work with clients, and this knowing yourself is a skill and something that is very telling in the early sessions of meeting with a client is that those of us who lose ourselves, in this example, if a client loses themselves, they talk about the other person a lot, especially if there's some crisis or problem, which usually links to we're feeling stuck, triggered, or crushed in our relationship in some way, and decide, like, I want to reach out, I'm going to start therapy. And when a client comes to me, all they're doing is talking about the other person, what the other person did, what the other person didn't do, what the other person is thinking, what they're not thinking. They're trying to decode the intention behind the other person with the invention, the creation and offering of AI, and many people going to AI to research their own mental health. They're becoming externally referent, that they want AI to tell them what's going on with the other person. And there's a reinforcing, not really knowing how they're feeling about themselves. This might show up in working with a client where they literally say their partner's name. Imagine their partner's name is Jason, or imagine their partner's name is Rachel. And so all I hear on my end, or what I mostly hear, is Jason, 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 and then Jason said this, and or then Rachel and Rachel, and I asked Rachel and I texted Rachel, and hey, can I show you the text that Rachel sent me back? And I will ask the question, I'll say, how do you feel? What's going on for you right now? And the answer will come back something about Jason or Rachel that in the moment they can't even name. They can't even receive the question, how do you feel in this moment, without channeling it through a lens, a framework, an understanding of the only way they can feel is through imagining some situational context of their particular relationship. So we talk about losing yourself in a relationship is gradual. It's this internal process where you're really prioritizing the relationship over your own sense of self. This is, and I love this phrase, it's an energetic shrinking. And I also like the phrase, we erase ourselves. And it's an energetic shrinking where we are reflexively monitoring, and we're going to explore that idea here, the emotional climate of the room, the situation, the interaction. And we're determining what part of ourself is allowed to come out, which part of ourself is permissible to express, and then also what part of us do we suppress. Losing ourselves means that we're suppressing too much. That certainly there's times, there's phrases like, well, it's not the right timing to create a request or some kind of demand. It's not the right time to talk about a difficult interaction with a partner. It's not the right. We need to, the phrase is pick your battles. But what happens is that we continually are always trying to do this like internal emotional math to determine, if I hold back, will I get connection? And if I don't hold back who I am I somehow going to be rejected? So there's this ongoing sense of this fear of abandonment and fear of rejection. I can't be me, and I got to constantly figure out, how do I show up in the way that I think that I want the other person that I think the way that the other person wants me to show up. So what we are doing constantly is we are assessing the attachment bond. Like, are we okay? Are we okay? Are we okay? Is everything good? Is everything going well? This becomes a automatic habit. It's a habituated response. If it's connected to trauma energy and trauma mind and trauma activation, it's what's referred to as hyper arousal and intrusive thinking, where there's just this ongoing, constant monologue about monitoring the relationship and making sure that you're connected to the person that you're in relationship. This suppressing who you are, this does, however, show up as much as it feels habitual and that you're not outright choosing to do it. Over time, the result is we're manipulating ourselves. We're continually telling ourselves, don't be ourselves. And we are picking and choosing what we reveal. We're stifling our voice and our needs. And in doing this, we're constantly self-correcting. We're policing our own behavior. We're the word here of reflexively monitoring. It means we're taking a piece of information externally, and then we're turning that piece of information onto ourselves to figure out, how do we adjust? How do we self-correct? How do we change? And we're hoping that the other person, it's going to maximize, again, that closeness and that proximity. We're expressing our needs and our wants in a conditioned way. And we're constantly asking, well, how will I be received if I share and show up with what I need, what I want, and in my words? What I've noticed with clients is that very early on, they don't know what they want. They can't voice it any longer. And there's this feeling that there's an embarrassment that shows up when the client doesn't quite know how to even, they have forgotten how to just focus on themselves. So it's very interesting as the therapeutic process is like, we're going to we're going to essentially, the pattern of what you're doing in your life is going to show up in therapy. So what this means is, in those moments, the client is not looking externally to their partner or to their family member to tell them how to behave. They start looking towards me, and they want me to give them clues. They're trying to gauge if it's okay to be themselves. And so my job is to be incredibly supportive and encouraging. And the first place that we start is to acknowledge it's okay if you can't identify your feeling. It's okay if you can't name what you're feeling. It's okay if that you've shut down that part of yourself and you're waiting for some external cue, or you're waiting for some awareness from the other person. Something about the other person makes you aware of now how you can respond back. This is really challenging when a relationship ends, because a person who has only been externally referent, trying to notice how they take cues from another person, when that relationship ends and the person leaves, it's highly, highly destabilizing. And that grief is so incredibly overwhelming. And it's in those moments that we say, like, well, I feel like when they left, they took a part of me that I don't even know who I am. And it feels like the death of a self, that not only the relationship ends, but if you think that your life force and your identity are linked to the other person, if the relationship ends and they move beyond, they move outside of your life, you're going to feel incredibly lost. Many people here in this experience do not realize, do not know what they want. So healing begins by starting to integrate the awareness of your body with your mind, and trying to identify sensations and feelings We're trying to synchronize the mind and body. We're trying to get back online with your nervous system, because what has happened is a continual disconnect from an awareness of yourself and your body. So in the process videos that I mentioned earlier, in the subscription membership process videos, are more about, let's take a breath. Let's inventory where you're at in this moment. Look around the room, take a pause, check in with your arms, your legs, your stomach, your spine, your feet, your fingers, your toes. And so this, again, this is not just information that's educational. It's information that you slow down and you start to think about, what does this mean for who you are today? What does this mean for who you're becoming? We're answering the question, do you lose yourself in relationship, or does the relationship make you lose yourself? This conditioned response of making yourself secondary when you're interacting with someone you're in a relationship with, this becomes a strategy for relationship, and it maximizes your chances to get your emotional needs met. However, there's a consequence. It results in diminishing your own presence. And over time, this leaves you invisible, not only in the relationship, but invisible in your life. So we're taking this phrase conditioned response, and what we mean by this is an adaptive strategy. I love that phrase. It's an adaptive strategy to get your emotional needs met. And certain requirements are placed on your self-expression. They're rules. We're talking about these rules. Don't say this, don't do this, don't act this way. And over time, you've trained yourself to morph, change, be a chameleon, become something that you might not be, because who you are, you've received some messaging historically. There's some information that says, you know what, it is just not safe to be me. And that it's if I share fully who I am, I'm going to not get what I want, which is relationship. So it's a strategy that's based on hedging your bets, a strategy that's based on imagining the future. It's a strategy that is based on shoulda, coulda, woulda. It's a strategy that's you're gambling with trying to maximize and preserve and protect connection, because you ultimately believe that connection is fragile to begin with, and there's a limitation. And if the person really knew who you are, they would leave anyway. It is just not safe to be yourself. Now, how this shows up in working with clients, and you might know this for your experience, is that it becomes about shame. That there's this shame voice. Shame says, don't do that. Don't do this. Don't do that other thing. Don't act like that. Don't say that. Don't text that. Are you familiar with your texting? And you might take 20 minutes to compose a text. And even if it's not 20 minutes, maybe it's only 10 minutes, but there's this incredible sense of crafting, and it's as if you're speaking in code at this point, and you're really trying to make sure that you word there's this hyper sensitivity and awareness to how you communicate, because you don't want to send some particular meaning. And then you start imagining the other person decoding your message. And are they going to understand what it means? And it's this very elaborate game where you can't just text, you can't just have a voice. There's a lot of self-manipulation and crafting or curating your presentation. If you do this enough over time, you're basically acting like an influencer in your own relationship. You're curating what you reveal about yourself, your image, what you want them to think about you, your set of values. And if you do this enough, And I'm not talking about doing it enough with the other person. I'm talking about the way that you do it, believing that this is how to be in relationship. You disconnect and lose connection with yourself. And you might even start to believe your own hype. You believe your own brand. You believe your own curated image. You believe your persona, which essentially is a presentation of who you want to be. And we'll go as far as to say a fake self, a false self. And many of us do this so well, we've been doing it our whole lives, that we have the word internalized. We've internalized this process where we now are operating where we actually believe we are this false self. Now, I am aware in this moment, talking about this, it can start to feel like the ground melts. Like there's this incredible, like, if I'm not myself, how am I a false self, and how would I know if I'm a false self? So it does begin to unfold. What I'm talking about here is looking at the way that we keep this going is by reinforcing shame. And when I'm working with clients, they oftentimes defend shame as being a motivator, and that they need to be hard on themselves, because if they don't, they're not going to get relationship, or they're not going to get a third date, a fourth date, or their partner who they married after many years will finally one day leave them. This is a framework of scarcity. This is a framework of, I really cannot be received, loved, accepted for who I am, and I can't reveal that I know this piece of information. So I'm going to pretend, and I'm going to create an outward presentation of who I think you want me to be. We're doing this because what we think is what we call relational harmony. We're trying to, everything's fine, everything's fine. But do you realize that everything's not fine if you're not actually present in the relationship? You don't have a voice, you don't know what you want or need, and you're frightened to reveal yourself. So you're doing this at the cost of relational harmony, but what it creates is this internal thick haze here, we mean a brain fog. Many of us stumble through our relationship chronically unclear about what is going on. And I'm going to repeat my same point. This is why many people love ChatGPT for mental health. This is why many people love, let's go to other AI and constantly ask it questions about our relationship. And we do this massive, incredible dump of information to say, oh, now please tell me what's going on, because I do not have the capability. I am so lost, and I have no grounded, centered sense of awareness. I have no seat of knowing who I am. I have placed my locus of control externally outside of myself, to the point that I want to give it over to you, AI, so that you can tell me who I am. And this is very scary, because we don't need more information, proof, diagram, bullet points, linear explanation of what's going on in your relationship. What we do need is your awareness, your ability to start to wake up to knowing who you are, and that who you are is welcome. At the core, underneath all of this, it just says, when in relationship, when it comes to getting love and being loved, when it comes to vulnerability and intimacy, it is not safe, and you are not welcome to be yourself. And you uphold that belief. You believe that that's true, and therefore this process we're talking about, the what experience of losing ourselves, unfolds. So in fact, it's not harmonious. It's the cost of what you're experiencing is a hollow piece. It's like having potato chips for dinner. It's never quite nourishing. you might go through the motions of having a date or being in a relationship where you get the chance to be an actress or an actor and you're playing the part of yourself in relationship. But there's an experience, it's what we would call a depersonalization. It's almost like you're not in your own movie, you're not in your own life, you're not in your own relationship. And also that can touch upon almost feeling like you are not real, and that's what we would call derealization. What happens when I work with clients, and it usually shows up early on, is that this shame is linked to an internalized rage, an internalized anger. There is a significant anger when you have been denied being yourself. There is a significant rage when you continually push yourself down. Think in terms of a pressure cooker. Over time, it's like, I'm not allowed to be myself. I'm not allowed to be myself. Don't be yourself. Don't be yourself. This messaging that continually is reinforced with shame, which is don't act like that. Don't do that. And that shame keeps you behaving in ways that you deny who you are. This rage is living in, you have to decide if this is true of your experience, but for many of us who have a history of losing ourselves, we think of where this came from. We think about like what is going on here. And it's that we have denied ourselves being ourselves for so long. It is very, very painful, and we're angry. And perhaps you have heard the phrase anger directed at ourselves, anger internalized, anger that is not expressed, can or sometimes is referred to as depression, and that we feel depressed in our relationship, which is also, if many of us, usually the relationship is not just horrible and consistently bad. We have good moments and good days, and there's a foundational connection, and I care about the person and they care about me, and over time we are also simultaneously having positive experiences. But if I also simultaneously keep editing myself out of my own life and editing myself out of my relationship, I'm going to get pretty angry. And if I'm not addressing this anger because I have an allegiance to these core beliefs that tell me to constantly deny who I am, I'm not going to be able to do anything about this anger. I'm not going to express the anger either, because that would have to reveal the whole system. And so I'm going to live with a diminished sense of self. I'm going to feel burdened. I'm going to feel like this big weight is on my shoulders. And for a number of us, we feel depressed. We feel like we lose our life force. We feel like we've lost access to some zest or vibrancy in life. Let's do a little review. We're going through the what, we're going through the why, we're going through the how, and not particular what I've just shared so far. That's the what of losing ourselves. And I will read back to you, I will share with you what I just said. Losing yourself in relationship is a gradual internal process where you prioritize the proximity of the relationship over your own sense of self. It is an energetic shrinking, or we would say we erase ourselves, where you reflexively monitor, you're constantly scanning the environment for the emotional climate of the room or the other person's mood, or if it's safe to reveal yourself. And in the process, you determine what parts of you you're going to suppress and what parts of you give permission to express. This conditioned response functions as a strategy to maximize the chances of getting your emotional needs met, though it results in a diminished presence that leaves you feeling invisible within your own life. And the cost of this, what we're calling relational harmony, believing like, oh, status quo, don't upset the apple cart. The cost of this is a thick internal haze that seems to show up all the time. And what we're talking about is confusion and doubt and brain fog. I don't even really know who I am, what I want, what I need, let alone voice it and ask for it in relationship. And our own desires and our own perspective become obscured because we've trained ourselves through this constant labor of managing the emotional state of others and managing the presentation of how we reveal ourselves to those that we are in relationship with. Let's continue on. We have two more parts here. That was what. Now we're going to go into why. Why is this happening? Why do we lose ourselves? And this is going to be a very similar format to the first section of what losing ourselves means. And there's going to be 4 sentences, and I'm going to break down some of the phrases, some of the words, some of the ideas for each sentences, and give examples of working with clients. And then also at the end, what I will do, similarly, I'll read it back to you just so that we have it to anchor it as a summary. This particular section, I'm going to talk about a range. So if we use the phrase emotional disconnect, there's a range from the beginning early stages, somewhat minor or mild, and then that range expands and increases and intensifies, and it moves into what we would say emotional neglect. So we have emotional non-engagement. Imagine a child with a parent, imagine yourself with a partner. But we're watching a video. Think of terms of you're at a coffee shop and you notice people interacting. And you can notice emotional non-engagement. Someone who's on their phone, another person speaking to them, they do not look up from their phone. They don't acknowledge the other person is saying anything or created a bid for connection. So I'm trying to explain here, want you to be aware of that this losing ourselves does not always happen in the most extreme cases, that it happens within the context of this range. And what's important to understand is that this is happening over time developmentally. It's usually not just a one-time moment. We're not talking about, imagine the person in the coffee shop with the phone, they're talking to someone, the person's not engaged, just not responding. And the person who's not responding doesn't even look up, doesn't even repeat, like, oh, honey, you said something, or oh, you asked me a question, ask me again so I can answer it. But imagine that non-engagement happens 800 times. Imagine it happens 800 times in a month. Imagine if that person who is on the receiving end of non-engagement, they've experienced that through childhood. They experience that in their family with their caregiver, their primary caregiver, their parent. Now, let's move beyond emotional non-engagement, which is this lack of active participation. And then we move into an emotional unawareness, like the person we're speaking to, it doesn't even register. It's like they're apathetic. They're just completely clueless and unaware that we just made a bid for connection. So it's not an active choice of non-engagement. At this point, it's not even being picked up on their radar screen that you're making an effort to connect with them. As I've already said, moves into some emotional apathy, an emotional disconnect, a fundamental break in some way from this bonding experience. And then we're moving into emotional neglect, considered the more extreme, the consistent absence of required emotional care. Take the same idea, this range of emotional disconnect, and now we want to apply that to a range of attachment impact. Like, how would this emotional neglect impact your attachment system? It might show up as attachment injuries, these negative experiences that they cause pain, but you can recover from, you can overcome. They're a bump in the road, but they don't last. Again, we're moving through a range of the impact of how this impacts our understanding, our learning how to create attachment bonds are being impacted by this emotional neglect. And over time, we might have attachment injuries. that move into more attachment wounds, which are these injuries that don't heal, but they remain open and our needs end up not being met. So this creates this internalized template for relationship, a blueprint, an operating system, a mind map. And we are going to bring our history of emotional neglect and bring our history of attachment injuries, wounds, and or trauma to our adult relationships. The experience originates when we're internalizing these various degrees of being ignored, and it's creating this template that you eventually learn to ignore yourself. So we're essentially repeating what we learned. uh, think of the phrase organizing principle. And organizing principles are core beliefs that link to core values and develop together, create a understanding and a framework of how we see the world, of how the world works. And these organizing principles guide us and help us make choices and determine how we create our relationships. So, if one of your organizing principles is this internalized belief that you've adopted the external awareness that other people are not engaging you, and you've turned it into a core belief of how the world works, you are not going to challenge that as an organizing principle. In fact, you're going to make it a truism and turn it into a roadmap for all your future relationships. When I'm working with clients, I have noticed it's very, very hard if you've erased yourself and if you don't matter or you've been ignored to the point where you now ignore yourself. Even talking about this becomes that brain fog, that hazy confusion. It becomes very difficult because you might not quite be able to put your finger on any specific experience. And in fact, if your family, your relatives, your caregivers, your parents showed up in some capacity where they offered good parenting, but simultaneously at times were non-engaging, were not able to engage you, were unavailable, or if there was some kind of attachment bond disconnect, that you still have these experiences that the parent did a good job at different times. And empathy to anyone watching this who has a strong reaction that says, no, my parent didn't do a good job. The whole range, the reason why I'm talking about range is that all of our experiences are welcome. And if we happen to also have simultaneously supportive, good experiences, it becomes very difficult to put our finger on this emotional disconnect and emotional neglect because our inner world was not talked about. And that, in fact, is a question I ask clients all the time who are trying to make sense of emotional neglect and attachment trauma. And I ask the question, did your parents ask you about your inner world? Did they want to know how you tick? Did they want to know about your world of imagination? And not only did they show curiosity and know about it, did they join you in that place and offer playfulness or adventure and genuinely be curious about what is going on for you? And hopefully also invited you to do the same about them, to ask them about who they are so that you might have some glimpse within reason, within the boundaries of a parent-child relationship, that they also, however, would want you to ask them about who they are, and they would love to share some aspect of their inner world. And that creates depth. That is the richness of emotional connection. And when we drop our judgments about ourselves and when we allow ourselves to come into some a connection with another person where it's safe, what happens is this sense of relational resonance and what's called attunement. And what we're talking about is the opposite and absence of relational resonance and attunement. And it is this sense of absence of non-relating, non-connection, non-emotional exchange that we are more familiar with. And it is in the realm of non-emotional connection that we can continually keep ourselves absent from the relationship that we are in. The opposite of all of this, of what we're talking about, is being able to provide, offer, experience, ground in, connect to a presence, a shared presence. You have adopted a relational map that began with emotional non-engagement, and it moved through a range of neglect. Remember, we talked about the range, teaching you that your presence is secondary. Who you are is secondary. The ugly reality of seen and not heard is teaching a child that their presence is less than. And perhaps you're of a generation, there's this phrase, children are to be seen, not heard. And it means don't reveal yourself. At a certain period of time, I don't know if that's completely true today in today's generation, but not too long ago, that was a main theme of culturally reinforce, let's not hear from children. Which means let's make sure that we don't get to know them as people, or we're not engaging on a level of an emotional connection. Because of your historical attachment was marked by these injuries and these wounds, you've developed, again, this idea, this phrase, adaptive strategy to handle prolonged disconnects through shrinking. And you have managed through an adaptive strategy to handle this disconnect by, and this is a really important point, making up the relationship. One reason why we got to think about it all the time is because we don't feel it's really there, because we have a history. We know what the absence is like. And so the extreme, or to overcompensate for the difficult feeling of not addressing the core absence, is that we have to chronically always talk about, think about, reflect on. That's the hyper focus, the preoccupied, anxious spinning of the relationship. The relationship. Remember, I mentioned Jason. What was Rachel doing? What's Rachel? These people, and we've never been able to address, turn away from the relationship, look initially at ourselves, but then go deeper into, where did this come from? When I work with clients, the false persona, as mentioned before, at this point, when we start to break down where this came from and start to map out this history, some people will say things like, I realize who I thought I am is not who I am. And that's like saying, like, I thought the sky was blue, but I'm realizing now the sky's purple. Your whole internal infrastructure can shift. And sometimes, if that shift occurs because of a relationship ended, it's the grief, it's the heartbreak. That's the extra added layer of feeling just completely crushed by the end of a relationship, because your own, how you orient to yourself in your world, and even these guiding principles, or these orienting principles that we're talking about, even they begin to crumble. And this is what happens when people say, like, I just don't know who I am. I try, I've been trying for years, but I really don't know who I am. It's this reoccurring link back to this core experience in our childhood, where we never were fully received and seen and mirrored and appreciated and accepted for who we are. And so therefore it just keeps showing up and repeating itself. There's a habitual quality, what we call trauma reenactment, repetition compulsion. A simple way of saying that is we just do what we know. And this is what we learned, and we're just going to keep repeating it and doing it. You have internalized the parent's habit of ignoring you as your own default way of being and showing up in relationships. So you're repeating the cycle, And this keeps you invisible. You remain invisible, and you remain a version of yourself that you have crafted, not necessarily the version of yourself that you've discovered yourself to be. You are repeating the parent's behavior as your own form of an attachment bond. And by ignoring yourself, you are behaving exactly the way that the parent did. And in an attachment sense, this is where it gets a little layered, a little complicated, as if it's not complicated already. You are honoring the parent. It's a form of misplaced loyalty. You're upholding this guiding principle or organizing principle, these core values, to keep yourself invisible, to keep yourself an empty shell, to not be seen. You're reinforcing not being seen, and in some way that keeps you connected to your parent, that keeps you connected to the thread of the history and the chronology of how you show up in the world. And changing that is what we call rewiring the brain. Changing that is remapping how you're in relationship, but it also requires realizing that through the lens of being the child who's loyal to the parent who ignores them, you also are going to grieve and give that up. And that feels like distancing, abandoning the parent. And a child, even if we're an adult child, the way our brain is wired through survival, we would never give up that connection with a parent. That's why for many of us, empathy, if this is you, sensitivity to these stories, these experiences, oftentimes it's an extreme abuse. It's a very hurtful, violent, aggressive environment that just says, hey, I can't be with this parent. I'm really got to cut all ties and walk away. And it takes many, many years to be able to get there. And even if you then don't have that experience of that level of degree of aggression or some kind of abuse, but yet emotional neglect still shows up and is a form of abuse, and that you were taught, even if that abuse was unintentional, you were taught to erase yourself in relationship and to tolerate being erased. If we go back to, we talked about the what of losing ourself, and now we're talking about the why of losing ourself. And I'm going to repeat as a summary what was shared, those 4 sentences. This experience originates from internalizing various degrees of being ignored, creating a template where you eventually learn to ignore yourself. You have adopted a relational map that began with emotional non-engagement and moved through a range. Remember, we talked about the range, a range of neglect. It teaches you that your presence, you being present, you showing up, is secondary, or even worse, is not welcome. And so because of your historical attachment, this history of your life growing up, your development, it was marked by injuries and open wounds that lacked the corrective attention, the healing experiences to override them. And so you developed an adaptive strategy to handle prolonged disconnects by shrinking. And you seek out relationships that have prolonged disconnects. You have internalized the parent's habit of ignoring you as your own version and default way of being. You repeat a cycle of ignoring yourself. You remain invisible to maintain a version of relationship and or to uphold the organizing principle, the core beliefs about how to create relationship. It's because it feels familiar. We've had part 1, losing ourselves in relationship, talking about, do you lose yourself in relationship, or does the relationship make you lose yourself? And the third section, we've had the what, the why, and this is the how. We answering the losing yourself in relationship, like what makes you lose yourself, the how do we heal, how do we change this, how do we grow? Well, we want to move beyond black and white thinking, because this history, these rules, this experience has become very, very rigid. Even the question, the way I purposefully languaged the question of, is it this or is it that? Do you lose yourself in relationship, or does the relationship make you lose yourself? Notice how you immediately are put into the bind, the bind of duality, where you have to pick, well, it's this one or it's that one. And this creates a black and white thinking. And perhaps when it comes to trauma, any kind of trauma, but attachment trauma, relationship trauma, a symptom is black and white thinking. We cannot see the range. We're in a very heightened state of protecting ourselves and guarding against repeating any of these trauma dynamics. So therefore, we see things through an extreme lens, which oftentimes also is a very myopic lens. When you are in trauma mind, you disconnect from resource, so you don't have perspective, you don't have range, you have myopic mind, and that includes either or thinking. And what we need to do in this question, do you lose yourself in relationship, or does the relationship make you lose yourself? The answer, the most simplistic answer, or the entry point into beginning to hold all of this, is the word, my favorite word that I use with clients all the time. I use two words all the time. The first word is sometimes. Sometimes this happens, as opposed to counter this black and white thinking that this will happen all the time. And the other word is both. Yeah, you lose yourself in relationships. You're doing this to yourself. Oh, by the way, yeah, well, the situation, the other person's skills, how you're interacting, it's also the relationship is making you lose yourself. Now, I know there's a bit of a tangent of that pushes some people's buttons. So, hey, nobody can make you feel or do anything. Maybe that's another video. I'm not going to tackle that one right now. But we want to begin to call out, this is not either or thinking. It's coming from multiple ways. It's coming from within our own. It sounds funny to say. It's coming from within the house, and it's coming from outside of the house. It's getting reinforced in both ways. Two, when you lose yourself, and if it's both, this black and white thinking, or if it's not both, if we're not allowing both to exist, this creates a very rigidity of thinking. And we need to begin to challenge the question itself rather than just trying to answer it. This rigidity of either or thinking, it reinforces the stark rules. These rules of, well, if I am myself, I won't be able to get my needs met. Or if I reveal my feelings, I will be rejected. These core strong beliefs have no range. We believe them as truisms. Part of the healing process of how do you heal from losing yourself, how do you begin to work with it, is to start uncovering what are these core beliefs. What I find when I'm working with clients and introducing this idea of both, it illuminates extreme language. It's rather easy. If you train yourself, you'll start to notice using words like always, never, the truth, reality, false self, true self. There's this is the way it is. And in the early stages of trying to begin to shift our perspective from seeing the world through the lens of losing ourselves, we are going to enter a defensiveness where we defend these core values and these strong opinions and absolute ways of seeing. We have lost the ability to have more of a gray area. We've lost the ability to see we've lost the ability to see possibility. What we're actually doing here is we're really giving our operating system an overhaul. Operating system, and think of computer, think of downloading an app, think of switching apps, think of what we're trying to do is start to introduce, it's possible There's many other people in the world who do relationship differently, who don't lose themselves. So we know it's possible. So what exactly does that look like? What are the skills that we would need? Uncovering the answers here requires a sensitivity to the fact that this is a repetitive pattern. Sensitivity here means compassion, and it means kindness. It means realizing you're going to do this again, that we often just resort back to autopilot, that there's this default setting. It's our relationship template. And this is what people use that phrase. I don't know if I like this phrase, but they say my picker is broken and I pick the same people. Well, not only do you pick the same people, but you continually participate in the same way, where you erase yourself and you don't voice your needs to the point where you're recreating as a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're colluding with this old wound and recreating through trauma reenactment, not bonds of connection and presence and attunement, but bonds of absence and disconnect and not being seen, where you can't be yourself. And that creates this incredible unrest of this internal profound tension of, I want to be myself, I can't be myself. I want to be myself, I can't be myself. And we are forever looking to the other person to give us permission to release, to break, to solve this tension. And the other person can't do it. We need to begin to look at our history and our tolerance for misplaced loyalty, our tolerance for absence, our tolerance for accepting crumbs, and how we, in fact, police our behaviors and we diminish our own sense of self in relationship. We want to look at and uncover the circumstances, the relational interactions, and the dynamics that activate this habituated response. What that means is you need to start inventorying your triggers. When are you triggered? When do you notice that this activates? This is a recurring pattern, so this requires I know many of you, many of us, we say, never again, never again. I'm not going to do this. We had a horrible experience. We had a painful experience. And then we come back saying, I'm not going to recreate a relationship like this. And yet we do. And the only way to find yourself is this is going to sound so obvious and cliche. Finding yourself is about finding yourself. And now I'm moving into what we talk. It's going to sound like word salad and it's going to sound confusing. This is about meta understanding, meta framework, about strengthening. And perhaps you've been introduced to Buddhism or you meditate a little bit. This idea of an observer self, that we can see ourselves seeing ourselves. We are the experience and the experiencer. We are objective and subjective at the same time. And it's thinking about thinking. It's relating to relating. This resonance, when you're with another person and you feel the attunement, you feel the resonance of relationship. There's also a way to show up to yourself, and this is what many of us, this is like kind of like a secret, or it's like, what are you talking about? If you can enjoy yourself and be with your own experience, slow down and watch yourself in a way that you haven't watched yourself before, and bring a curiosity. Do you remember that example I gave you? These two people are sitting at a table in a coffee shop at a cafe, and one person speaks and the other person looks up from their phone, and there's this engagement. Take that example, and apply it to yourself, that when you call upon your own curiosity, you reflect it back to, not to externally what other people do or how you're being perceived, but wanting to know your own experience within that experience. So if meta means like thinking about thinking, and in terms of mindfulness, it means paying attention to paying attention. We're talking self-resonance is this feeling of seeing yourself, discovering yourself, discovering yourself. And I know this through creativity and through artwork, that if you create something, oftentimes after you've created it, either in the experience of doing it, but when you're finished, you look at it, what's reflected back to you is yourself. And there's this particular feeling that's almost delicious of like, I created that, but I'm seeing reflected back to me an aspect of who I am. And there's something incredibly powerful and uplifting. That is the counter opposite of losing ourselves in relationship. It's being available to be with yourself. And we can use words like, well, we're learning how to be a friend with ourselves, which, remember, I mentioned shame before. Shame is so important here. We're dismantling shame. The opposite of shame is acceptance. The opposite of shame is, can you give yourself the benefit of the doubt? The opposite of shame of being hard on yourself is to be kind to yourself. And this is not an idea. This isn't something that I just cook up intellectually. It's an actual practice where I direct warmth towards myself. I enjoy myself receiving my own attention. And we can use real life interactions with other people, or in this example, I'm going to use it with dogs or a puppy, because I literally an hour ago just saw a brand new puppy on the street who's 9 weeks old, and he's like a border or a collie, border collie. I mean, the kind of puppy that, I saw him a block away, and I like walked briskly to catch up with them just so I could like say hello to this 9-week-old puppy. And I enjoyed the puppy's preciousness. I enjoyed the puppy's existence. I enjoyed the puppy having a puppy nature. It was so innocent, and just it did all the puppy things. The big eyes, the cute, trying to like get closer to me as I said hello. So the way I let that in and responded to that puppy, and I'm sorry if this is a weird example, but we do that for ourselves, and we replace the puppy with our own preciousness. And this is what's meant by like inner child healing and self-reparenting. Put that younger self of who you once were, who was ignored, who people did not look up across the dinner table or ask you about your inner world. But the same way that I'm sure you know how to enjoy a beautiful little animal, a puppy on the street, do you know how to turn that same quality of engagement and interest and softness and just delighting in the essence of that animal? That is what we're doing for ourselves when we say, learn to love yourself before someone else can love you. That's what we mean when we say befriend yourself. That's what we mean when we say, can you direct some compassion, give yourself a break, be a little kinder with yourself. It's keeping yourself company, showing up and being able to sit with yourself, which is language of meditation. We come, what are we doing in meditation? We're doing nothing. We don't care about our thoughts. We don't care about feeling good and relaxing. We want to be here now. And when I'm here now, I want to just fully accept and receive the experience as it is. The same way with this puppy on the street, it's an example of I was just really fully in the present moment. I knew that the puppy was only going to be there for 30 seconds for me to say hello. There was, in that present moment, a limited exchange and awareness. I did not have time to think about how I wanted the puppy's owners to receive me. I didn't have time to change my behavior and be something that I thought the puppy wanted me to be. I show up in the present moment, knowing it's fleeting, know that it's impermanent, and in that moment, have an authentic experience of connection. And basically, in that example, that's what we're learning how to do with ourselves, that we did not learn how to do that. Instead, what we learned historically is disconnect from yourself, disconnect from yourself, disconnect from yourself. This strategy, we're talking about how to work with losing ourselves. This strategy is ultimately a way to manage a very intense fear of abandonment and a rejection by clinging to the only way that we know how to stay connected. Even as much as we fear abandonment, essentially we are repeatedly abandoning ourselves when we don't show up, when we don't know who we are, when we've lost our voice, and when we recreate relationships with people who don't see us, don't mirror back to who we are, and then we sit there starving, no nourishment, no emotional connection, and we experience feeling abandoned. And the paradox of that is we're trying to avoid feeling abandoned. But if you're not in your relationship, if you're not present, if you've lost yourself, then you're not there to be in relationship. It's a very fancy house of cards that you ultimately are not going to get the thing that you say that you want. When I work with clients, what we're doing is uncovering this history. We uncover the original wound, and we uncover those moments and times where there were disconnects, where people did not look up at us across the dinner table, where something was sitting with us that was very important, and no one showed any curiosity for who we are. And that we are very frightened of the intensity that is created, the attachment distress that it comes with revealing who we are, because we could not handle historically, which is why it shows up as attachment trauma. When you are so utterly, completely ignored for who you are and your unique preciousness, that back to that puppy, that preciousness of that puppy, if you did not have enough interactions where someone saw your goodness and your preciousness and your uniqueness and your depth in your inner world, it leaves you to believe that you must not matter, or you have people are not interested in who you are because you must not be interesting. And then you turn that into an organizing principle, and you orient to the world thinking that you're less than and you don't matter. And then you create relationships where you continually keep yourself out of the relationship because you're reinforcing the core belief that you don't matter. Moving from this idea of healing into the art of healing. So, what we're talking about now requires a shift of information to the actual experience of feeling. Check in with your body right now. Take a breath. How is this information landing? Your arms, your legs, your stomach, your spine, your feet, your fingers, your toes. And it's a continual process of saying, am I showing up for myself now? How am I paying attention now? Am I curious about who I am right now? What is my body telling me right now? What reassurance do I need right now? What kind of encouragement do I need right now? And this will not resolve itself on this one video. And no, in this moment, I'm not making a plug for more videos to come on this saying, this is a series. This is a series. No, I'm saying this will not resolve in one video or two videos, or this is a lifetime process. It's same as eating. You don't arrive at a point where you say, oh, I just realized I'm so full, I don't need to eat anymore. Being available to yourself, knowing yourself, developing a relationship with yourself is the same as having 3 meals a day. You do it 3 times a day in order to make sure that you are actively investing in giving yourself the nourishment that you need. And if you start showing up for yourself like this, also you begin to change your relationship and communicate to others that you have new organizing principles, and that the degree and level of showing curiosity, speaking to bids of connection, being able to respond to bids of connection, wanting to practice the uncomfortableness, the vulnerability, the uncomfortableness of being open and available. Because what we're talking about is all about reinforcing our own emotional unavailability. And yet we also seem to pick people to participate in this cycle, in this pattern. And then we get all bent out of shape that it's like, Rachel and Jason, man, Rachel and Jason are giving a hard time on this video. Whatever name we use, substitute whatever name, but whoever they are, the other people, and we think that they're emotionally unavailable. Maybe they are, because they chances are we pick people who have the same history. They also are hiding in relationships. They also don't know who they are. They also have not had experience of being seen, known, heard, valued, understood, and reinforce their own sense of that they matter, their needs matter, their vulnerability matters, their wanting emotional attunement matters. Or here's the other thing. This is really an important off ramp or intersection of what we're talking about. We if this is important to you, have to accept some people do not want this. Some people don't care. Some people, as much as we can explain it, it's so important, emotional connection. Some people don't value it. Some people say, I'm okay, I'm good. I'm not interested in emotional availability. I'm not interested in practicing revealing myself through intimacy. I'm not really interested in looking at my history and my past and feeling the uncomfortableness of shame and anger and rage and depression and missed opportunities. And they say I'm good. That's just not who I am. If we're in relationship with others who they don't value this level of connection, they don't value uncovering the what, the why, and the how. They don't value hearing you explain this about yourself. They don't want to know. That's also what we have to learn to not bring reality distortion, to not bring misplaced loyalty, to not bring overriding red flags. We have to exhale and accept that piece of information that says we're with someone who does not want the same thing that we want. Because what I'm talking about, this is a skill. And how we practice that skill is something that we need to do on a regular basis. And if you surround yourself with people who don't do this, it's going to dramatically limit your ability to arrive at the place, the vision, the light at the end of the tunnel, to move beyond attachment, trauma dynamics, if those around you do not want this and are not doing this. Thank you for joining me on this video. As I said, this is a part of a series. As I've said, you can get my notes if you want to sign up for those. This video is about losing yourself. I also have a workbook called the Finding Yourself Workbook, and it's 46 pages, and it links to another video, and the other video is about being stuck, triggered, and crushed. And usually those are the three main experiences that new clients come to me feeling crushed, triggered, or crushed. And we need to break down, what does that mean? Where's that coming from? And how do we begin to strengthen a sense of self? How do we find ourselves? So you can also sign up for that workbook if you would like to do that. Empathy to you, if this is your experience. Many of us know this. You're not alone. And there's times at night when you're lying awake, staring at the ceiling. This attachment distress keeps you awake. So the invitation, as I've already said, is to direct some compassion towards yourself. Let's have compassion for each other. And finally, more going deeper into the process, really beginning to unpack the layers is what I'm offering. The subscription membership here on YouTube. Please check that out. Creating a library of information so that we could always come back to these videos and learn something new and realize that we're creating community, and that my goal is to connect again back. I get many messages of people who say, oh, I've known you for 4 years, or I've watched your videos 5 years ago and I listen to you all the time. I would love to hear from you. I would love for you to connect through either getting one of the handouts, the workbook, or join in the membership, because it's a way to stay connected. And I want us to all deepen our creating relationship that matters. Thank you. See you next time.